Manners from Heaven by Quentin Chapter 2, Manners from Heaven. Opening quotation. Life begins within a family. Manners are taught, and character is molded within the family structure. This is how a child learns to cope with life. Without this knowledge, discipline, and support, the child does not grow easily into a social human being. Therefore, when two people marry, start a family, and reach toward their individual goals in life, they carry an enormous responsibility toward their joint creation of offspring brought into the world. It is obvious and visible to everyone that well-mannered parents raise well-mannered children. These are the people, too, who are successful in their careers and in their social lives. People with good manners care about others. They are happy people. Amy Vanderbilt's Everyday Etiquette, revised by Letitia Baldridge. Charity begins at home, Sir Thomas Browne once said, forging a cliché in the smithy of his soul. While there may be homes where charity occasionally puts in an appearance, for most of us, home is the last place we would expect to find this shy woodland sprite of a virtue. We learn many things from our parents, as Hamlet can attest: abuse, deceit, vulgarity, condescension, hypocrisy, corruption, invasions of privacy, authoritarianism, and murderous rages. We do not learn good behavior in our homes except by hearsay. Living en famille provides the strongest motives for rudeness combined with the maximum opportunity for displaying it. Embarrassment is at its most acute when it involves what an insurance broker would call third-party risk. Between any two people, an overture can be made, a plot hatched, or an insult delivered by one party, and the second can reply by acquiescence, or by disengaging himself without feeling or imparting a deep sense of shame. However, if a third person is present, someone nearly always deems it necessary to explain, or at least excuse what has been said or done. That's the trouble with life at home. There are too many witnesses, and all of them have lifelong memories. When a movie is described as being family entertainment, it usually means that it depicts events and expresses sentiments that will cause no embarrassment to some members of a family if witnessed in the presence of others, providing that all members abide by a non-aggression pact in which each keeps his critical intelligence sheathed. The word family, as used in this phrase, describes a dream unit, presided over by a daughter's idea of a father, kept spick and span by a son's idea of a mother, and romped in innocently by a parent's idea of children. It is all like a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm, but the truth is grimmer. If Mr. Vincent Price were to be co-starred with Miss Betty Davis in a story by Mr. Edgar Allan Poe, directed by Mr. Roger Corman, it could not fully express the pent-up violence and depravity of a single day in the life of the average family. Mrs. Amy Vanderbilt, an American and therefore an optimistic arbiter of manners, states that well-behaved parents automatically have well-behaved progeny. It could be that Mrs. Vanderbilt was reading too much Mr. Browne and thinking too charitably of home. In fact, the opposite is more often true. It is in early adolescence, precisely at the age when a teen creature has begun dimly to recognize the existence of good manners, that he most dislikes his parents. He starts to react against them with the full force of his primitive nature. The only power that can control him is stark terror, but fathers with nice manners are unwilling to act forcefully. Nay, from a lifelong of feigned neutrality, they have lost the knack of throwing their young across the room. This misguided lenience encourages further rebellion, and soon the parent, if a modern American, is paying $75 an hour to a psychoanalytic babysitter to get to the root of the problem. The generation now, in its late and seemingly perpetual adolescence, shocks the modern world by its nihilistic crudity. These young people were born in the 60s. They are the weed people whose parents were the older members of the flower people. Sweetness and light led inevitably to darkness and death. If, on the other hand, its parents are tyrannical, a child tends, in self-defense, to retreat into a world of at least apparent acquiescence. In earlier times, there was an alternative. The boys at least could run away to sea. The sea, however, can no longer be trusted. As we know from reading the works of various Scottish poets, the sea was forever hurt and angry, but nevertheless it represented a sort of black hole into which our more courageous misfits could disappear. Now it has been dredged by Interpol. A youngster has hardly set foot upon some foreign strand before the police seize him and return him to his parents. The authorities have not yet realized that the one place to which those who have run away from home must on no account be returned is their point of departure. The primary impoliteness of many parents is their failure to conceal the fact that to them their children are not individuals, they are simply their ambassadors to the world. As soon as a son hears his mother begin a sentence with the words, "I never thought that any child of mine," he knows that she is not for a moment interested in his happiness, she is only concerned with how he represents her to the neighbors. He is not being brought up. He is being published by the directors of a household of which he is, however reluctantly, a product. His wishes can never be the point of an argument, though at home there will be little else but discord. Can any rules be constructed that will act as a breakwater to this tide of bitterness? Parents must learn to treat their children as equals in all matters that do not concern worldly wisdom. Sometimes even that can be explained. A schoolgirl committed to a minor crime, which some busybody brought to the notice of the headmistress. The child's mother was summoned to the school, and the situation explained to her. The parent expressed herself in agreement with the proposed punishment. Later, at home, the daughter protested. She had assumed that her mother would be on her side. "While you attend that school, I shall always appear to be in agreement with your teachers, because I pay no fees for your education." Thus the child was not given an unbelievable, po-faced lecture about morality, but a glimpse of the world that she would soon enter, as it really is. In that moment she was treated by her mother as an equal, although a nuisance. As a child, I had great difficulty trying to work out what natural behavior was in any aspect of human life. How could I explain to my parents that I was an extraterrestrial destined to take his manners from heaven? My father disliked me, and I returned the compliment. My mother was a failed Lady Bracknell. My father died when I was 22. My mother never understood my activities as a model or a freelance commercial artist, and until she died, when I was 56, she would say, "Are you still out of work?" In my early years of acute embarrassment, otherwise known as childhood, I didn't know that I was a resident alien. That adjustment to society was maladjustment for me. Alternately, I confirmed and denied what was set forth. Alternately, I protested and acquiesced. This is what happens to most young people. One day they decide to brazen out their individuality. The next they decide that the price is too great and they try to conform. It may take years for someone to realize that they are miscast for the roles they are offered in the Broadway drama of life, and that they would be better off declining a part in an overrated mediocrity. There are great roles off Broadway. Doubtless this realization comes earlier to some people than to others. In my case, it wasn't until I was nearly 30 that I brought to an end the anguish of failing to conform, of not measuring up to other people's expectations. The biggest single obstacle I faced was that I was genuinely and absolutely unable to understand other people's feelings and point of view, even when it was forcibly expressed, and as a result, I couldn't make the correct gestures towards them. I can remember during the war being totally unable to understand why people would walk around Chelsea going to bomb sites and watching them being dismantled in search of bodies. I remember one woman saying to me when I'd joined a huddle of observers for a moment, "For heaven's sake, don't look as if you're enjoying yourself." And I said, "All right," and put on a grave appearance like hers, as if contemplating mortality from a poetical point of view, as opposed to the commercial view of an undertaker. Yet, inwardly, I was flummoxed as to why anyone should go to a bomb site and reverentially stare at people searching for dead bodies in a great hole in the ground. Apparently, it was natural for this woman and many others to go there, although she couldn't let it appear that she was morbidly excited. Throughout my life, I've never been able to understand other people's reactions to anything, which makes it harder for me to do and say the natural thing. Now, if told of somebody's death, I will say, "How terrible," and look at the floor for an appropriate interval. But I don't really feel it is terrible, because in my view, death is the least awful thing that can happen to someone. A great many human sentiments strike me as the bad habits of a conditioned psyche, rather than what a person truly feels or thinks. I don't empathize with others' concern with world issues or moral problems. I have never voted. All political parties are the same once they take office, and I don't see the point in voting for redundancy. I've lived under conservative governments and Labour governments in England for nearly 70 years without altering my way of living in the least. Ideally, the purpose of government is to create a walled garden in which anarchy can flourish. Wise governments have frayed edges, as if to say, "These are the rules, but they're probably not absolute." Unwise governments, run by parties that take themselves too seriously, tend to say, "These are the rules fixed forever, and we'll enforce them with all our might." Something is bound to go wrong. Human nature invalidates every form of government, and the form that it invalidates the fastest is totalitarianism. Had there been a surrealist party, I might have voted for that. I certainly felt that my life in England fulfilled the basic definition of surrealism, the absurd juxtaposition of two objects not normally found together. Once, when I was in a railway carriage stuffed with teachers, on my way to the Maidstone School of Art where I was employed as a model, someone asked me for my opinion about modern art. It was at a time in my life when I still rashly spoke my mind. I said I never understood art of any kind, and I meant it. Whereupon one of the masters said, "That's no answer, because you have made of yourself a work of art. Maybe a bad work of art, but all the same, you are a conscious creation, and have thought about not only your appearance, but also your entire way of life, your mode of speaking, your gestures, the way you live. You've done all this exactly like someone standing in front of a canvas, saying, 'The pink is too bright, I'll tone it down a little.' You have rearranged yourself until you are the best you can do with the poor materials available." He didn't actually say that, but that's what he meant. It was then that I realized that I had indeed become my own creation, not merely noticed by others, but recognized for what I was. I was suffused with a feeling of relief, as if at last I had crossed a bridge from muddled youth to self-confident maturity. People tend to be born with everything in turmoil inside them, and they have to keep pushing it around to get to a point where they are comfortable. Once they succeed in that and overcome a kind of moral indigestion, they begin to feel calmer and are able to address the world with less anxiety and greater patience. Anything that assists one in arriving at a calm state in life, yoga, exercise, meditation by the sea, and, above all else, having a room of one's own, a place where no one intrudes, will probably have a beneficial effect on one's manners. I think that one does want less as the years go by, but even if this were not so, one takes a longer view of the world and one's relation to it. There isn't this desperate need to have something or prove something now. Instead, you think, well, I'll think about it, and if tomorrow I still feel as strongly as this, I will set about dealing with the situation. Once you realize that some of your reactions are immediate and temporary, and not worth making a fuss about, you have already won half the battle. This process might be termed temperamental exercises. You begin to temper your judgments and judge your tempers for your own sake, as well as for others. Once you have decided who you are, even for the time being, and sorted out your real needs from your apparent, immediate ones, you can then present to the world this considered image in a considered manner. The more sure you are of yourself, of your image, of how you see yourself, of what the overall message of your existence is, the more calm your way of expressing yourself becomes. When you are a child, or are childish, you tend to live in a fragmented but all-consuming dream of yourself, so that your mercurial joys, griefs, and worries are something you can't help imposing upon others. There are insensitive people who stand beside you at a bus stop, and within 2 minutes they're saying, "I'll never get there. These buses never come. I've been late for an appointment twice this week." Such people can't think. This person beside me is probably just as anxious as I am. The bus is just as late for him. I shouldn't impose my problems. It isn't that these people have a message or anything else to give you. They are so full of themselves that other people barely exist. Children and animals behave in much the same way, exploding with useless energy. Dogs rush into a room and jump all over you. They don't know how to think. They don't want to be covered in dog hair. I should creep in and lie quietly in a corner. Children burst into a room where their mother is playing bridge and demand attention to some tale that no one wants to hear, least of all at that moment. Low forms of life and the immature live in a constant state of self-centered turmoil. Gradually, for those who aspire to learn the Tao of manners, this time comes when you settle what your limits are. You begin to look inward and outward. You may think, as I did, well, it's all a mess inside, but it's the best I can do, and I won't go on about it anymore. With that settled, you begin to look outward, and when someone arrives and says, "I've broken my wrist," you don't reply, "Oh, I can imagine it's terrible. I remember a time when I broke my entire arm and I was in a cast." You're able to say simply, "Is there anything I can do?" At some point in my early 30s, I began to take a conscious interest in my behavior and to study that of others with a keen but detached interest. As I knew more and more people and began to live the café life, I would spend time most days with strangers, and if not strangers, with the merest of acquaintances. That's when your manners count for the most, because that's all they see. They can't really form a view of your character. You are simply somebody whom they would or would not like to have sit with them. I remember a certain Mrs. McAllister saying, "You're crazy about your entrance, aren't you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" knowing quite well what she meant, and secretly pleased that she had noticed. I had only to arrive, and people would be saying, "Come and sit with us." I used to have my soup at one table, my entree at another, my coffee at a third, because I can never have too many people. That's when you cultivate a certain public image in a small way. You want to seem interesting to look at, to phrase things interestingly and amusingly, and above all else, to seem to be concerned with other people. I made a deliberate decision about this. Learning about other people is rather like reading a book. You have to try to remember what you read last week. Nothing is more effective than to be able to sit down at someone's table and say, "How's your broken heart?" or "How's your rheumatism?" This wins over people like nothing else, although it is only a feat of memory. I have remained all my life a resident alien in the heart of the world, immune to most human problems, but subject to a few special difficulties. I have thus learned to be an agreeable companion to many different people of all ages and stages in life, genuinely interested in almost everybody as long as they don't repeat themselves. There is an important distinction to be made between taking an interest in people and in becoming emotionally involved. I adore the former and avoid the latter. I am genuinely able to take an interest in subjects that have no pertinence to my life. Let's say your cat becomes ill. Now I would simply put it in a basket, take it to a vet, and say, "Get rid of the damned thing." But I will take an interest in why on earth you care so deeply about your cat. It's interesting, even though I have no feelings about the creature. I don't sympathize in the true sense of the word. I do not lay my feelings alongside yours in maudlin rapport, but I take an interest in things that are important to others as a further revelation of human interest. I may think, how extraordinary for a grown-up person to be going through this crisis over a cat. Has this person nothing else in his life but his cat? Or is it that his cat's ailment is the only thing he feels free to share with me? And so on. As a well-mannered listener to your dogmas and catastrophes, I bring an engagement and a detachment at the same time. My interest is real, if somewhat ironic, but I won't burst into tears if your furry loved one dies. In my youth, my lack of feelings and uncertainties of how to react to people were one of my torments. But once I stopped measuring myself by other people and abstract standards, I found that these aspects of my personality were useful in producing placidity. If I had to give one explanation for other people's problems, it would be, I love you more than you love me. I have not felt this in the last 50 years. If I love you, and I am concerned to find ways of expressing this that will not be a burden to you. I was horrified one night at the Players Theatre on McDougal Street in Greenwich Village, New York. While performing in the show, An Evening with Quentin Crisp, the subject of love came up, and a woman said, "One loves surely in the hope of being loved in return." I couldn't help answering, though it was bad manners to do so, "That is a terrible thing to say." This is the heart of any number of people's problems. They want their love to be requited, which seems to me to be completely beside the point. Love doesn't have to be requited to be called love. This key problem, which disfigures many lives, happily does not affect me in the least. Lonely people are empty people. It is an evasion of responsibility to oneself to hope that someone else will come along and fill the black holes of your soul. Manners are love in a cool climate. If I had one message to beam to the human race, it would be, cool it, and start treating one another better than you do in heat.